Both Ministers Annalena Baerbock and Minister Mélanie Joly join me now from Montreal. Welcome to you both.
Pleasure. Hi.
Minister Joly, I'm going to start with you. As you know well, Canada broke its own sanctions to return this turbine. Russia is now saying it's impossible to get the turbine back where it needs to go because of sanctions. What do you say to that?
I think that it was a very difficult situation and a very difficult decision that Canada took in the circumstances. And to get to that decision, we worked obviously with Germany, we worked with Ukraine, we worked also with the European Union and also the State Department in the US. And we, after all these discussions, one thing was clear is that the argument of calling Putin's bluff was the one that would prevail, because what Putin is trying to do is really sow division between allies, as we know right now that what he's doing, and basically that's why we're calling his bluff, is he's trying to weaponize energy flows. To Germany and to Europe.
So help me understand, Minister. I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. Today, yes. Russia's saying, oh, we can't bring the turbine back to where it needs to go. And they're blaming the sanctions, saying that, they don't have the necessary paperwork. Do you buy that response from Russia?
Of course not. We haven't trusted Russia since the invasion. This won't change. Mm-hmm. President Putin is weaponizing energy against allies and against particularly Germans and Europeans. He is doing so with food as well, against Asian countries and African countries. So this is a hybrid war in which we're engaged, which is one clearly that is fought on the ground in Ukraine, and we're supporting Ukrainians which are fighting an existential war. Meanwhile, also, we know that they're using economic coercion measures against the West.
Given everything that you've just said, Minister Joly, the fact that they're playing games, you say that you wanted to call Russia's bluff, it looks like that's happened. The gas is not flowing as Germany would like, and yet there is still this 2-year exemption in place. At what point do you say, we're going to stop violating our own sanctions, we're not going to leave this in place for 2 years? At what point do you cut off this process? Because you know that it has offended and upset the Ukrainians greatly that we're violating these sanctions. When do you say, stop, enough is enough?
Well, like I said, we obviously reached out to Ukrainians. I had a conversation with Minister of Foreign Affairs Kuleba from Ukraine yesterday, and we talked about many other issues because obviously we know we had to be steadfast in our support as Ukrainians are on the ground fighting. We are sending military equipment. We have imposed also stronger sanctions, and we're there also to provide financial support to Ukraine because the country needs to continue to provide services to its people. But meanwhile, on the question of the sanctions, we knew that Siemens here in Canada had a contract for 6 turbines. We decided to offer this, to grant this permit, but at the same time, our goal is not to play in any forms of games of President Putin himself. And of course, we will always work with Germans, with Europeans and Ukrainians to fight the right path forward. That's our goal.
I do not hear a clear plan to cut off there, but Minister Baerbock has been politely sitting beside you, and I do want to turn to her and ask her a little bit about all of this. Minister Baerbock, as you know very well, Canada has been heavily criticized for violating its own sanctions in order to repair these turbines. I know that Chancellor Olaf Scholz sent a statement to the Globe and Mail newspaper here in this country, essentially defending Canada's position. Now you are here, you're speaking to us, you were doing other events today. Is Germany doing a little bit of public relations for Canada here, trying to repair a bit of the damage that's been done?
Well, we are thanks to our friends and to our closest partners. And I know how difficult this is in this situation, that Canada is giving back this turbine. But the thing is, this is not politics in theory. We are in the midst of a war, and the war is not playing with normal rules like in international relation, because otherwise there would not be war. This war is like a fundamental breach of international law. And this is, we can see also with the this turbine. Obviously, Putin is playing a game also with energy, as the minister has said. He's using energy as a weapon, and he tried to split our unity, because this is the biggest threat for him, the unity between all our partners, because he definitely knew that Canada, because Canada is not as depending, or is not at all depending on Russian gas as we are. So he tried to sneeze into this difference between the sanctions from the European Union and the Canadian sanction. But we were crystal clear from the beginning on, if this moment would come that Putin would like to divide us, then we stand united together. And I'm really thankful to the Canadian government. I think this is true leadership, that when in political times there is the question on which side you are standing on, the Canadians said, well, obviously we stand with our friends and partners, even though we had different lines with sanction, because Canada was not as depending as my country, which was a fault from the past on Russian energy, that the Canadian government is supporting us. And now the world can see crystal clear that the whole question about this turbine was just about making a fuss, saying, well, see, they don't support each other, and now the turbine is laying in Germany, as you have mentioned, and the whole world can see that Putin was just using this turbine trying to divide us.
So do you still need the exemption, though? I mean, if it didn't work, when do you just sort of give up?
But I don't know on what giving up. The situation is that it is. We are still depending on Russian gas by 26%, and not only Germany, many other European countries. I can just repeat myself. This is a big mistake from the past, but this is unfortunately spilled milk. So we found a way to phase out of fossil energy from Russia. We need some time, and over this time we're totally phasing out. Okay. But he's playing a game, and I think it's important that we stand united together.
I do want to ask you another question about your need for energy. Germany pushing for liquefied natural gas terminals on Canada's east coast to help supply your country deal with some of your energy challenges. We know that is a kind of project that takes years and years. What is the soonest that you believe, if this is successful, you could be getting LNG from Canada?
Well, because I'm not the engineer doing these terminals, I don't know how long it needs exactly, but obviously this doesn't work within a couple of months, and this is why in these tricky times we had to take tricky decisions, that we need still the gas from Russia, because the LNG gas won't be there in November or in January. But because we don't want to repeat the mistakes from the past, we are looking at energy partnerships with our closest friends. In the past, this was a mistake. My country was looking at the cheapest gas we could get. We have learned from this hard mistake, which we have to pay a lot for, that we are looking at energy partnerships with friends and partners we can trust, based on law, based on regulation, based on environmental standards. But for me, it's important. It's not only about short-term liquefied gas. The long-term perspective we're having between the European Union, Germany and Canada is hydrogen, green hydrogen, because this is not only a question about energy sovereignty in this crisis, this is also a question how we can fight the climate crisis together, and the energy, the green hydrogen is the answer to that.
I'd like to bring Minister Joly back into the conversation, Minister, on this question of supplying Canadian LNG to Germany. We know that this is something Germany is interested in. We know the Chancellor is coming later in the month of August. In your mind, is this still something that is tentative, that could happen, or is it clear to you that ultimately Canada will be supplying LNG to Germany?
Well, obviously there are many steps to approve projects, but one thing is clear is that we need to be in solution mode to help Europe. There is an energy crisis happening. There is also a way for Canada to help. And more we're seeing friendshoring. So like my colleague, Annalena was referring to, Minister Baerbock, is really doing business with countries that share your values and that abide by the rule of law. That's the case definitely between the European Union and as well as Canada. Definitely we're looking at LNG projects, but also we're looking at projects that can eventually become hydrogen and green hydrogen ways to export.
But I don't hear you, pardon me for interrupting, Minister, but our time is limited. I do not hear you saying that it is an absolute certainty in your mind that Canada is going to be able to step up for Germany when it comes to LNG specifically.
Well, obviously, there needs to be many steps put forward, investors, regulatory bodies, but definitely at the diplomatic side, my goal is to make sure that we can have these conversations, that that investors understand in which political environment they're investing, how much provinces are also on board. I had many conversations definitely with my colleagues, the Minister of Natural Resources, Jonathan Wilkinson, who's been on this, the Minister of Environment, our counterparts in Quebec, New Brunswick, and also Newfoundland. And of course, we're willing to have many conversations with the sector because we know that the context since February 24th has completely changed and we need to do both. Okay. We need to be there for friends and at the same time, we need to continue to fight climate change.
Okay, I can't let you go, Minister, without asking you about some of the details that have become apparent about the situation with our embassy in Kyiv and local diplomatic staff being threatened. You said in a news conference this morning that both you and your department were not aware of a threat to embassy staff in Kyiv. But we know, it was publicly reported, this information was shared with Five Eyes partners. So how do you explain the failure to share what could have been life or death information with you and your department? Why didn't you get that information?
We shared all the information we had that was required in the circumstances.
But why didn't you have the information?
We had a moral obligation towards our locally engaged staff to make sure that in times of crisis, of war, they would be in a safe place and they would be protected by Canada. That was the case. They were also offered to come to Canada through an immigration pathway. Some of them came, some of them decided to stay in Ukraine. And also we were there to make sure that they would receive their payments, their compensation and benefits, even though Canadian diplomats had left. And so for me, that has been a priority since before the war, because I met with the locally engaged staff in January when I was in Ukraine. I followed up with our ambassador on site, followed up afterward the wars, obviously. And at the same time, I think that it is important for Canadians to know that we are there to support the Canadian diplomats, but also that we're there to support the very people that are serving us in their own countries where we're serving abroad.
Minister, to be clear, a Five Eyes briefing said that there was a danger to this staff. You said this morning you and your department didn't know, correct?
What I'm saying to you is that we had no specific information targeting locally engaged staff. And I'm clear on this issue. And of course, we've done everything that was required in the circumstances to protect our locally engaged staff. And I stand by my word.
Was the ambassador aware of this intelligence briefing about a threat? You're saying no specific information, but we know there was an intelligence briefing.
Of course, there are many intelligence briefings when preparing for a war. I've had numerous intelligence briefings. And for me, what I had in mind always is obviously we needed to abide by our duty of care. And obviously we needed to support our Canadian diplomats. But at the same time, I knew very well that Canadian diplomats are supported by locally engaged staff.
So, sorry, I'm very sorry to interrupt, Minister,
and in that circumstances, it was paramount to my team and I and to the department to make sure that they would be protected. And that's what we did.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to be clear on this. Are you saying that there was no specific threat, or are you saying that you were not aware of any specific threat? Because those aren't the same thing.
We were not aware of any specific threat.
So there was a specific threat and you were not made aware of it?
We knew that war was coming. We knew that the invasion was being planned.
Surely you're asking for answers. Surely you are asking for answers right now. If there was a specific threat and you weren't made aware. What are you asking your officials right now to tell you?
I'm telling you right now that we did every steps required in the circumstances to protect our Canadian diplomats. And on the day of the invasion, I was even on the phone with our top Canadian diplomat in Ukraine Larissa Galadza, the ambassador, to make sure that the staff was well treated and at the same time that they would have access to pathways to come to Canada.
But someone dropped the ball and didn't tell you.
Not at all. Canadians can be sure, while listening to us, that the Canadian government was there and was abiding by our moral responsibility towards the people that are helping us in Ukraine.
Last question, Minister. I'm going to ask you about the embassy. It was reopened in May, and yet it does not appear to be open. Were Canadians misled about that?
We always said that we would be resuming our diplomatic presence in Ukraine. That's exactly what we did. Now, we know that there are Canadian diplomats supported by locally engaged staff that are working out of Kyiv, and we are making the security assessment as we go, as we want to, of course, increase our presence. But we know also that Ukraine is a war-torn country, and in that circumstances, we want to make sure that we take decisions based on security risks.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. You've both been very generous with your time. Thank you very much, Ministers.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.